Trump not happy with Russian bombing of Ukraine, says he doesn't know what's happening there. This was right after the missile attack on Kiev and Ri, which is Zelensky's hometown. It's in west central Ukraine, and 9 kids died. Oh, many others as well. A lot more wounded, and it was tearing apart restaurants and playground sets, slides, and swings. It was a horrible tragedy. But it's followed by many other horrible tragedies of civilian buildings being hit after the Russians told him in private and Trump announced to the world there was a civilian ceasefire and the energy ceasefire that was violated right after it was entered. All these ceasefire violations are being most acutely felt by the civilians on the ground who you cannot tell that there is an existent ceasefire. Could you imagine walking up to one of the mothers who lost her kid on a swing and saying, well, we have a ceasefire. This happen. If that can happen within a ceasefire, is it a ceasefire? If the ceasefire is over areas like the Black Sea where the least amount of people are dying and where the Russians have already lost 50% of their fleet, or with the energy war, long-range energy strikes, which are not only being violated, but even if it was upheld, would have been most acutely needed during the winter when that energy was needed for the babushkas who wanted to live in their homes and not be frozen out, and is now being used to defend Russian energy infrastructure that's used to process and refine oil, natural gases, and help fund the war effort. I mean, how do these ceasefires address Trump's key issue, which he keeps bringing up, of saving civilian lives? It doesn't really, and it hasn't. And so when he talks of these ceasefires and pushes these ceasefires and says that he got Russia to agree to these ceasefires, if he was to in public acknowledge, like, oh, this was a horrible tragedy, this specific bombing, the Russians murdered X, Y, and Z, if he was to acknowledge that, he'd be publicly acknowledging and bringing attention to his diplomatic failures. And so he doesn't know what's happening there. Now, this could be one of two things. Number one, it could be that Tulsi Gabbard, the top intelligence official in the country, does not believe it is of enough significance that Ukrainian children are being blown up at their playgrounds while negotiating a ceasefire where the Americans said that that type of civilian infrastructure would be protected. It's of so little significance that it's not even worth mentioning to the American president. Or he does know and he doesn't want to bring it up. I've seen the American ambassador to Ukraine change their rhetoric so quickly when it comes to talking about strikes in Ukraine. It used to be the Russians did this, Russians do that. Now it's there was a strike. What a tragedy. We need to end the war, without ever naming the culprit. And this only changed after the outrage from Ukrainians was so great after the Kiev and Ri strike that she started saying, hey, look, here's a bunker underground in a school to protect from Russian missiles. This shift is read by the Russians, and if you don't think they're taking advantage of it, like, oh, well, the Trump administration doesn't feel like it has the maneuverability to tell us to stop, then I think you're naive. Of course they're going to take advantage of that. And that has led to a lot of skepticism in Ukraine that the ceasefire is not going to work. Because if you're told that, hey, a ceasefire has been signed, and then a drone slams into your apartment, well, ceasefire means cease the fire. So it doesn't, you're going to have a little bit of problems. And this has led, after so many violations of the ceasefire, to some people asking, Chris York, former chief editor of the New York Post and now working over at the Kiev Independent, and Andrea and others, going around talking to experts, trying to figure out, like, okay, does Trump have a red line? Is there going to be a thing where, a drone hits this place or kills these many civilians? How many kids blow up, or how many civilians get hit, or what happens? What has to happen for Trump to say, okay, I have to come and support Ukraine? And they really don't know. There's some people who say that if, this fails, then he'll have to eventually come around to support Ukraine in order to save his political fortunes, because support for Ukraine is still pretty popular. And right now his numbers aren't looking too good. And he doesn't want to look like a diplomatic failure in his first engagement when the Afghanistan withdrawal was, that was such a disaster for the Biden administration politically that they never recovered. Biden never recovered from the Afghanistan withdrawal. And we're like 2.5 months into Trump's presidency. He's already in the negative numbers. So there's some theories that like eventually the building public pressure, and maybe if they can have the cojones, if they can grow a spine, if they can dig their feet in the ground and think I'm choosing country over myself, some Republicans break with such a slim majority in the House, then maybe they could threaten some of Trump's agenda in order to get maybe some Ukraine passed or force Trump politically. That's at least a hope. Now, all of this might sound like living on a prayer because it kind of is to a bit. Because there's other experts that think that there really isn't a red line. That as we've seen from Russia's probing and its bombing and its continued violations of the ceasefire, which, by the way, if you do not think that the world notices that Trump's administration signs ceasefire, immediately fails, signs another ceasefire, immediately fails again, re-engages on a ceasefire to recommit itself to the energy ceasefire, fails again. If you don't think this is noticed, when the Russians lie about striking military targets in Kiev and Ri, and then all the footage contradicts the devastating military losses that they're lying about and projecting, if you don't think the Ukrainians see it and that the world doesn't see it, and the UN, which is releasing reports about these strikes, don't see it, they do. They do. It's gotten a lot of the world's attention again because of the Trump element, this shakeup. People are looking to see if the shakeup's going to work, and right now it ain't shaking straight. And this has actually, I think, helped re-engage Ukraine in some areas from the fact that if Ukraine agrees to unilateral ceasefires after having aid cut off to it, and the Russians just reject it outright, what message does that send to the Saudis or to the Turks or to others about Ukraine seeking peace and the Russians not seeking peace, about who the problem is and whether that can divert more support to them? That still has yet to be seen, but it certainly has sent the signal internationally, and the pressure on Ukraine to, you know, do this, do that for peace, it's really only coming from the White House right now, and of course the Russians. And all of this is leading to suspicions that once these red lines are crossed again, and that the Russians find themselves either poke and prod without more American support coming down the tube, that the Russians are going to do a big new offensive. That they're going to do a big new offensive in spring, take advantage of the thawing. We're seeing them draft the most people in 14 years, 160,000 men, as they're pre-positioning for offensive operations. Now, whether it's going to be an attack to take Pokrovsk, whether it's going to be an attack into Sumy and Kharkiv to gain leverage so they can try to, you know, take over Kherson, whether they're going to try to do a dangerous river crossing, which I doubt, to take Kherson. I doubt they would want to throw in that much more risk into the equation. I think that they're prepared for a spring offensive, and a lot of other analysts agree. And if they are prepared for a spring offensive and the Trump administration is not, then we're sleepwalking into a disaster. And I don't know how to describe it any other way. And so I am trying to figure out, what can Zelenskyy do to wake up people from this sleepwalk, to make people say, look, the Russians so far have not shown any diplomatic indication that they really want to make an inroad towards peace. What can we do in order to garner the Trump government or the American public to pressure them into acting? Well, I know Razom is working. I know other organizations are working to try to build public pressure in support for Ukraine. The majority of the American public wants to continue or increase support for Ukraine at a rate of roughly 60%. So it seems to be that the argument with the public is succeeding. It needs to have more success, of course, to increase pressure, but it's succeeding. The other thing that needs to happen is there has to be a way to get the Trump government to feel that there's a necessity for them to engage, that they have to, either for their own good, either for America's critical national security interests that they cannot ignore, or otherwise. And one thing I've noticed is this post in relation to that idea, because everybody's talking about these Chinese troops in Ukraine in relation to just like, oh my God, are these Chinese soldiers? And the odd that they are Chinese soldiers, as in soldiers in the PLA, in the People's Liberation, officially employed with the Chinese government, I think that's low. I don't think it's impossible. In fact, if these were Chinese soldiers, I would say that it'd be likely that they would be observers. That means people that have been sent by the Chinese in order to observe the battlefield and learn from Russia's battlefield experience in order to improve their own warfare capabilities. That I think the Chinese, I would be very unsurprised if the Chinese were doing that and the Ukrainians possibly captured one. I'd be surprised at the Ukrainians capturing one. What is, I think, a lot more likely is Chinese citizens who might have previous PLA experience retiring or leaving that and then joining with one of the Russian mercenary groups in return for the high contracts and high amounts of pay that they're currently offering. I think that is much more likely. Both of these are possibilities, but I do think the latter is more likely. Why would the Zelensky government highlight this? And we're going to read their message in a moment. Well, I think it has to do for one of two purposes. Number one, if you get less Chinese citizens going over to Russia to join up, that means less men you have to fight against. So there is some purpose, I think, in hoping to get the Chinese government to address it, maybe. But I think there's a bigger purpose of, hey, look, everybody, there's Chinese mercenaries or Chinese soldiers we don't know yet, Chinese men coming over to Russia to invade Ukraine. We have North Koreans invading us. We have Chinese soldiers and mercenaries invading us. We are being targeted as the enemy of America's strategic rivals. North Korea, their soldiers are invading Ukraine. Russia, of course. Iran, their drones and weapons have been used on the battlefield. And Chinese dual-use goods and a lot of the drone industry, etc. And of course, the Chinese drone industry has also traded a lot with Ukraine because it helps build up the industry, and China's the real only all upsides winner of that equation, because of course the drones are falling in Ukraine, the drones are killing people, but in China they're profiting and building up their drone industry. Either way, I do think there's a certain amount of marketing here that is probably targeted towards an American audience, and I think that's also why it's in English, boys. Let's read it and then let's watch the video. Armed military has captured 2 Chinese citizens who were fighting as part of the Russian army. This happened on Ukrainian territory. Now, by the way, I do want to throw this out here. If you've been watching the DylanBurnsTV channel, or DylanBurnsLIVE specifically, the second channel, DylanBurnsTV, check out the Here's On documentary. It's fantastic. But if you've been watching the DylanBurnsLIVE channel for a bit, you might have remembered that this is actually not the first time that we've covered Chinese mercenaries, or at least in the other instance, we're talking about Chinese mercenaries. We don't know about that for sure. It could be spotters, we don't know, but suspected mercenaries. Being in Russia, we've covered this before, about those Chinese mercenaries recording their experiences for social media, posting them online, talking about what it's like to serve in the Russian army. I think almost like a year ago, we were talking about this, maybe a year and a half ago. So it's not news that there are Chinese people in the Russian army invading Ukraine, but it is Zelensky leaning into it more, which is why I highlight this. We have information that suggests there are many more Chinese citizens in the occupiers' units than just these 2. We are currently verifying all the facts, intelligence, the security service of Ukraine, and the relevant units of the armed forces are working on it. I have instructed the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine to immediately contact Beijing and clarify how China intends to respond to this. Russia's involvement of China, along with other countries, whether directly or indirectly, in this war in Europe is a clear signal that Putin intends to do anything but end the war. See, there's the messaging. It's not only, hey, your geopolitical enemies are supporting us, but hey, they're drafting 160,000 people. It's the largest draft in 14 years. If you look at state media, they're drumming the drumbeat. They're saying, look, we're winning, we're winning. Charge forward, charge forward. They're positioning for expansions in the military budget for 2025, for expansion of the armed forces, expansion of the force in Ukraine. They're continuing to pay more and more and more and try to recruit more volunteers. They're trying to undercut Ukraine's defense through the ceasefire, asking them to stop mobilization while they're fighting, etc. For mobilization, stop mobilization during the ceasefire, so if they resume fighting, they're in a weaker position. And so they're trying to bring attention to the fact that, look, the North Korean soldiers, they were fighting in Kursk. You might soon see them in Ukraine, invading deeper and deeper into Europe. And if that's the case, then that would indicate the Russians are preparing for negotiations to fail. I do think that, again, this is clearly sent towards an American audience. He is looking for ways to continue the fighting. This definitely requires a response. That's directly directed towards one man, Donald Trump. A response from the United States, Europe, and all those around the world who want peace. The captured Chinese citizens are now in the custody of the security service of Ukraine. Relevant investigative and operational actions are ongoing. Here's a video of the man talking.
走到地方，呜呜，嘣嘣嘣嘣嘣嘣嘣嘣嘣，然后我的 commander，boom.
You know, he might not speak good Ukrainian. He might not speak good English, but boom, commander, I think translates across all lines. I don't think there's any language where that's not going to be clear. And the sound of the drone as well.
然后就哇，然后就啊，然后我呀啊，然后他就跟那个。
And that's the video. I will say that the American government has acknowledged these reports of China capturing 2 Chinese citizens. They did say it was disturbing. And they said, yeah, they're a major enabler. But I have yet to see any statement from them threatening a response. And this is the problem. When North Korea was in Kursk, the response from America was, we're now allowing long-range strikes in Russia. That's a strong response. Could have been done earlier, could have had a more effect if it was done sooner, could have maybe supplied them more. There's a bunch of other things that could have been done, but it was one of the responses we gave. It was the justification that the Biden administration used to allow long-range strikes, which means that there was a negative consequence for their actions. There was a deterrent. It was you escalated the war by getting another country to invade and fight in this war against Ukraine. So we're now giving Ukraine more capabilities to fight in Kursk against these North Korean soldiers. But now if more and more Chinese mercenaries are going in and Russia, say, moves North Korean troops off of the border with Kursk, or even just keeps them there, continuing to, remove strain off the Russian armed forces, or even moves them into Ukraine, invading deeper into Europe, what response can Russia expect after such a conciliatory policy and negotiations and no pressure yet being wreaked upon the Russians to the point where we're not even placing tariffs on their goods while we're placing tariffs on Ukraine in recent tariff announcements? So you can call it bad, you can call it gross, you can call it whatever you want, but if you're just, saying, oh, it's bad and not doing anything about it or announcing possible responses, what does that ultimately mean?
Okay. Thank you, Tammy. 2 more questions here on Ukraine.
Yes, sir.
Can you please also confirm that there will be U.S.-Ukraine dialogue negotiation this week in Washington? And any color you can offer, who's going to be involved? Will they be in this building as well?
I can't speak to any conversation or discussion about Russia-Ukraine here.
Right. Thank you. On Chinese involvement in Ukraine-Russia war, President Zelenskyy today posted a video suggesting that they captured 2 of Chinese nationals fighting in Ukraine on behalf of Russia. Does the Secretary have any comment on that? And does it change your view, your position on how to help Ukraine, beef up Ukraine's hands?
Yeah.
Now that we know they're fighting against not one.
It's disturbing. It's disturbing with North Korea participating. It's disturbing with the Chinese soldiers having been captured. We're aware of those reports that Ukraine captured 2 Chinese citizens fighting on behalf of Russia in Ukraine. China is a major enabler of Russia in the war in Ukraine. China provides nearly 80% of the dual-use items Russia needs to sustain the war. 80% comes from China. As President Trump has said, continued cooperation between these 2 nuclear powers will only further contribute to global instability and make the United States and other countries less safe, less secure, and less prosperous. I think that's an understatement.
Just to follow up, Secretary, spoke to us during the travel. He said that he will give some time to Russia to clear up its position in terms of, whether or not they are serious about the peace talks.
Yes.
To the events of this weekend, them targeting Zelensky's hometown and other attacks, did those events contribute, to the Secretary's position on that?
Well, I know he loves talking to you guys on the trips. We were at NATO together, and he appreciates that. And he had a press conference at the end of NATO where he did go into very specifics when he was asked about the timeline, is that we would know within a matter of weeks if Russia was serious about peace. He said not months, not a year, but a matter of weeks, he said, we would know. And I think that this goes to the argument that they've made, even in the beginning of the talks, some of the summits with Russia, and the first summit was, as the Secretary had noted, was to determine if they were serious. And so this, as I've mentioned, right, these are...
And you want to know what? They have yet to determine if they're serious, so we're 2 months into it.
These are active men with a term in which to get this done. And plus the lives affected, we don't have time. Every day, every week that goes by affects the quality of people's lives, and some people who are alive now will not be alive tomorrow. So it is held with urgency. It will be a matter of weeks. And you, of course, you mentioned the attack on Kryvyi Rih.
By the way, they said a matter of weeks, like a week or two ago. So how long is the weeks?
Which is I guess the hometown of President Zelenskyy. It was a Russian Federation ballistic missile strike in a residential neighborhood of that town. It is further underscores President Trump's urgent call for peace. And he's affected by this. It's long time to stop the death and the destruction and end this war, just as we know President Trump has been committed to finding and demanding the return of the missing or stolen Ukrainian children from Russia.
Have you ever seen Trump mention the kidnapped kids? Have you ever heard him mention the kidnapped kids like it's a priority? If we're going to get the United States to concede troops in Ukraine, why haven't we gotten them to concede, the Russians to concede, they're going to give all the kids back right off the bat? I mean, that should be like a bare minimum. But that's the type of stuff you do finish before negotiations even started. But we haven't gotten that. This is just talking on behalf of President Trump. They'd like President Trump to be concerned about it, so let's just pretend he's concerned about it.